Part 5. Silent Deaths. When we lose connection with ourselves. 5.1. Symptoms: depression, lack of motivation, and the feeling of living someone else's life. There are deaths that don't take the form of accidents, illnesses, or old age. They are silent deaths, when a person is still breathing, still going to work, still smiling at the right moments, but something inside has long since faded. A death that no one notices, not even the person living it. It doesn't come suddenly, nor with violence, but slowly seeps in like a wound of the spirit that never heals. The symptoms often begin subtly: a vague sense of exhaustion, waking up each morning with a tightness in the chest. Even though physically, everything seems fine. Work continues, relationships are intact, life holds no major crisis. Yet a part of us is no longer present. Everything feels automatic, repetitive, meaningless. Questions like, what am I doing? Or is this really the life I want? Start to echo, only to be drowned out by the rhythm of responsibility. Many people enter this state without realizing they've lost connection with themselves. They call it pressure, a tiring phase, or a temporary lack of motivation. But looking deeper, the symptoms become clearer. Joy slowly disappears. Every effort feels like a duty, and deep down, there is a suffocating loneliness, even when surrounded by others. Depression doesn't always show itself through tears or breakdowns. Some forms of depression were tidy disguises: punctual employees, responsive to emails, loving parents. But inside, a world is dimming. Nothing stirs the heart anymore. Nothing feels exciting enough to get out of bed for. When we no longer see ourselves in the life we're living, it's a serious alarm. One of the defining signals of this state is the feeling, I'm living someone else's life. You may be a successful doctor, a devoted mother, a respected CEO, but somewhere deep down, you know this isn't you. Every choice you've made has been for someone else, to please your parents, to meet society's standards, or simply because you didn't dare to break what you had built. But when the inner self and the external life fall out of alignment, we gradually get lost in the image we created. Psychology refers to this state as internal disconnection, a mental condition where a person can no longer clearly sense themselves, their core values, or their true direction. Those who experience this often feel lost, aimless, or worse, like their existence has lost all meaning. Not because they're weak, but because they've lived too long as a version of themselves that no longer reflects their true heart. From a Buddhist perspective, when our actions no longer come from the heart, then that heart begins to die. It's a kind of death that no one mourns, but one that quietly destroys life from within. In existential philosophy, Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people, not as a judgment, but to describe the suffering of having to live under the gaze, expectations, and judgment of others." When life becomes a stage to perform, instead of a space to be, then even if we are alive, we've already lost authentic existence. The danger is that modern society is increasingly skilled at decorating these silent deaths. We are taught to maintain appearances, be successful, and be useful, but simply because they've gone too long without living as themselves. 5.2. 20 years in banking, and the morning he realized he never wanted this life. At the age of 47, he paused and suddenly found himself unable to lift his hand. It wasn't physical pain. It was something deeper. He simply couldn't find a reason to go to the bank for one more day. In a fleeting yet piercing moment, his life played out like a slow-motion film. Years spent studying finance only because his father insisted. His first job chosen because it was the safe choice. Promotions earned through compliance rather than creativity, and the false pride he felt when introduced as a successful man. Every decision in his life seemed to have been shaped by someone else, by expectations, by norms, by what was deemed right. That very morning, Thomas requested a leave of absence. Not for travel, not to rest, but to quietly sit with himself for the first time in 2 decades. He rented a small lakeside cabin in Vermont, with no phone, no internet. And in that stillness, he began to face a question he had never dared to ask. Who am I when I am no longer a title, a role, or the sum of other people's expectations? The answer didn't come easily. The first few days in the cabin were filled with anxiety and emptiness. But over time, amidst long afternoons by the still water, through pages of a journal he'd never kept before. He began to remember something. When he was a boy, he used to love drawing. In high school, he had wanted to study art. But one day, when he told his father, the stern man replied, "Art won't put food on your table. You need a real future." Thomas went quiet, folded up his sketches, and never touched them again. That silence lasted over 30 years. When he returned to Boston after 3 weeks in Vermont, Thomas formally resigned. He sold his luxury car, downsized his expenses, and enrolled in a local community college art class. At first, his wife and friends thought he was having a midlife crisis. But he didn't try to explain himself. For the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to fit into any role. Day by day, he began to feel alive. Not bound, not performing, just himself, with pencils, watercolors, and a quiet peace in each brushstroke. He never became a famous painter. His work was never displayed in a museum. But at a small exhibition at the local library, he hung a painting titled, "The First Time I Met Myself," at 47. Thomas's journey is a clear expression of awakening from ignorance, avidya, a return to one's true nature after years of living in layers of false self, molded by societal constructs. He did not abandon his roles as a father or husband or his financial responsibilities, but he refused to continue living like a machine, programmed by choices he never consciously made. In existential psychology, this is the moment of ego deconstruction, when a person dares to admit that their current life no longer reflects who they are and courageously chooses a new path. What drains us isn't always the job, but the act of living in a way that betrays our inner truth. Thomas's story isn't a call for everyone to quit their jobs or abandon responsibilities. It's a reminder. If you wake up every morning with the sense that you're living someone else's life, then you may be losing the most precious thing of all, the chance to live authentically. It's never too late to meet yourself. Thomas took 20 years to realize that. Some people take 40. Some never do. 5.3. The desire to awaken, but the fear of losing identity. In a quiet corner of a small cafe in Amsterdam, Clara sat with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had already gone cold. She had been staring at the street outside for almost an hour, watching people pass by, each seemingly knowing where they were going, each wrapped in their own stories. Clara was a successful corporate lawyer, well respected in her field, with a business card that could open many doors. Yet, for years now, she had been carrying a silent question in her heart. Is this truly my life, or just the role I was trained to play? Deep down, Clara longed for something different, a life more aligned with her inner calling. Something that wasn't measured by billable hours, status, or the weight of legal cases. She dreamed of working with vulnerable communities, of painting again as she did in her youth, of living in a small coastal town where mornings began with the sound of waves instead of email notifications. The thought of it filled her with both warmth and terror, because to pursue that path meant dismantling the very identity she had built over decades. She feared the look of surprise, or even pity, in her colleagues' eyes. She feared her parents' disappointment after years of sacrifice to see her succeed. And more than anything, she feared losing the sense of certainty that came with her current life, even if it felt like a cage. This fear is more common than we think. Many people carry within them a silent yearning to awaken to a truer life. But with small acts of honesty, she started painting again in the evenings. She took weekend trips alone to places that stirred her soul. The greatest act of courage is not in holding on to the life we know, but in surrendering to the life that is quietly waiting for us, beneath the roles, beyond the masks, and right at the center of our own being. 5.4. Psychological death, when one must let go of themselves to be reborn. In the outskirts of Stockholm, on a quiet winter morning, snowflakes fell gently onto rooftops. Henrik, a man in his early 50s, sat in his small kitchen, his hands wrapped around a cup of steaming coffee. 6 months earlier, he had experienced a sudden collapse of the world he knew. The company he had worked for over 25 years abruptly went bankrupt. Henrik lost his job, and with it, the identity he had believed defined who he was. In those first days, it felt as if a part of him had died. No more mornings putting on a crisp suit. No more meetings where his voice carried weight. No more business cards to hand out when meeting new people. Henrik realized that the greatest loss wasn't his income or his familiar schedule. It was the sense of who he was that had been taken away. In psychology and philosophy, this experience is often called psychological death. It is when a part of the ego's structure, the beliefs, roles, or personal narratives we cling to, is completely shattered. It can happen when we lose a job, a relationship, a dream, or simply when we awaken to the fact that the path we've been walking all along was never truly ours. Psychological death often comes with panic and emptiness. For as limiting as the ego's frameworks can be, they still give us something to hold on to, a sense of familiarity. When that disappears, it feels like falling into a void, unsure of where to anchor ourselves. Many people resist this stage by clinging even harder to old roles or by rushing to replace them, just to avoid confronting the emptiness inside. Yet from another perspective, this is an opportunity for rebirth. Psychological death is the condition that allows a new self, truer and freer, to emerge. It is like the Nordic winter. On the surface, everything appears lifeless, yet beneath the snow, life is quietly preparing for spring. Henrik spent many months wrestling with his loss. But instead of rushing to find a similar job, he allowed himself to listen to long-forgotten desires. He took up photography again, a passion from his youth that he had abandoned. He went on long hikes, spoke to strangers in small cafes. Slowly, he realized he was no longer the CFO of a company, and he didn't need to be in order for his life to hold meaning. Psychological death is never comfortable. It demands that we let go of what once defined us. But in that letting go, a new space opens up, a space where the seeds of freedom and of a new life can take root. In Buddhism, this resonates with the concept of anatta, non-self, the understanding that all identities and labels are temporary, not our unchanging essence. When we allow an old self to die, we are not losing ourselves. We are drawing closer to our most authentic being. Now, Henrik no longer fears looking back at what happened. He is grateful for it, because without that winter, he would never have stepped into the spring of his own soul. Sometimes, psychological death is not the end, but the opening chapter of a life truly worth living. Part 6. Awakening, when the role begins to fracture. 6.1. The moments that jolt you awake. Illness, loss, failure, divorce. There are moments in life that strike without warning. Moments that tear through the familiar scenery of our existence, as if someone had taken a blade to the fabric of our carefully constructed world. They don't knock politely on the door of our awareness. They crash through it. It could be the diagnosis you never saw coming. The phone call in the middle of the night telling you that someone you love is gone. The sudden collapse of a career you've poured your soul into for decades. The cold, unceremonious signing of divorce papers after years of emotional distance. In those first moments, the shock is paralyzing. You might feel as though the ground beneath your feet has disappeared, and all you can do is cling to whatever remains of the life you once knew. You try to keep up the role, to glue the mask back together before anyone notices the cracks. You tell yourself, this is temporary. I'll get back on track. But something is different now. The conversations you once found engaging now feel hollow. The applause for your performance no longer reaches you in the same way. The daily routines that once defined you now seem strangely disconnected, like a play whose script you've suddenly forgotten. Illness has a way of stripping away the illusion of control. When your body, once so reliable, refuses to obey, you are reminded, sharply, that time is not infinite. Loss carves an aching silence into your days, a silence that demands answers to questions you've avoided for years. Failure doesn't just close a door. It can burn the entire bridge back to the world you knew, leaving you standing in the vast, terrifying wilderness of the unknown. Divorce unravels the shared dream, forcing you to wake up in a reality split in two. And yet, within these ruptures, there is often a strange kind of clarity. Without the role, without the mask, you are suddenly confronted with yourself, your real self. You begin to see how much of your identity rested on fragile structures, job titles, possessions, social recognition, predictable routines. When these are stripped away, the raw truth of who you are stands exposed. Some will do anything to escape this exposure. They rush to replace the old role with a new one, to plaster over the cracks before they become too visible. But others, whether through exhaustion, surrender, or a flicker of curiosity, choose to stop running. They allow themselves to be still. And in that stillness, a long-forgotten voice begins to speak, their own. This is the paradox of awakening. It so often begins in the rubble. Pain can open doors that comfort never will. Once you have glimpsed the space beyond the role, beyond the performance, it becomes almost impossible to unsee it. The moments we dread most, illness, loss, failure, separation, are often the very invitations life uses to call us home to ourselves. They strip away the set pieces, the costumes, the stage lighting, leaving only the unadorned human being underneath. And maybe, for the first time, we start living not as a character in someone else's play, but as who we truly are. 6.2. The day she stopped living for others. In the city of Melbourne, Australia, where cafe windows are often steamed up from the cold and streets hum with the sound of trams, there lived a young woman named Emily Carter. At 29, Emily was the kind of person everyone liked, polite, agreeable, always willing to help. She had a smile that made others feel comfortable, yet it rarely reached her eyes. From a young age, Emily had learned that approval was the safest currency. Her parents, though loving in their own way, had high expectations. Good grades weren't a matter of pride, they were a requirement. Politeness wasn't about kindness, it was about maintaining appearances. And so, Emily became an expert in pleasing others. She chose a career in marketing not because she loved it, but because her father once said, "It's a solid, respectable field." She dated men her friends approved of, wore clothes her colleagues complimented, and agreed to social events she secretly dreaded. Emily was at a friend's engagement party, surrounded by laughter, champagne, and the sound of clinking glasses. Her boyfriend, Daniel, was across the room, chatting animatedly with a group of women. Emily didn't think much of it, until she overheard one of her friends whisper, "I can't believe Daniel brought her here when he's been seeing that girl from his office." The words sliced through the noise of the party. Emily's first instinct wasn't anger, it was shame. Shame that she hadn't noticed, that maybe she had done something wrong. She excused herself, went to the restroom, and stared at her reflection in the mirror. For a long time, she didn't cry. She simply looked at herself as if she were seeing a stranger. In the days that followed, the betrayal unraveled like a loose thread. Daniel didn't deny it. In fact, his apology felt more like an explanation. He said he had been feeling unfulfilled, as if Emily's role had been to keep him constantly satisfied. Strangely, Emily didn't feel the burning rage that movies and books often describe. What she felt was a deep, aching hollowness. One evening, while sitting alone in her apartment, she asked herself the question she had avoided her entire life. If I stopped trying to please everyone, what would I actually do? The answer didn't come right away, but she realized she had been living reactively, shaping herself to fit other people's molds. The betrayal had ripped away the illusion that this was safety. It was just another kind of prison. Emily began to make small changes. She quit the social events she had no interest in. She started painting again, something she had loved as a child. She even took a weekend trip to the coast, alone, just to see what it felt like to wake up without anyone else's expectations pressing on her. It was terrifying, but also exhilarating. She began to feel a strange lightness, as though she had been carrying invisible weights for years without knowing it. Months later, she would look back and realize that Daniel's betrayal. Emily's journey wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about reclaiming the authorship of her own story. And for the first time in years, when she smiled, it reached her eyes. 6.3. Roles are temporary. The essence is eternal. In a quiet coastal town in Portugal, there lived a man named Miguel Duarte. At the age of 52, Miguel had spent nearly 3 decades as the captain of fishing vessels. Everyone in the region knew him, not only for his skill at steering ships, but also for his calm demeanor and his ability to handle any situation at sea. To many, Miguel was Captain Duarte, both in his profession and in the way he carried himself in the community. But the ocean is never gentle forever. One harsh winter, the younger sailors organized a farewell gathering, and everyone was moved. Yet as the applause and well wishes faded, a quiet emptiness opened in his heart. Miguel realized that he was no longer Captain Duarte, at least not in the way people had always called him. He no longer had the early morning departures, the rumble of the engine beneath his feet, or the sensation of the vessel rising over silver waves. In those first days at home, he felt adrift. The man who once commanded an entire crew now sat by the window, watching the sea from afar. One afternoon, Miguel visited an old friend, João, a retired teacher of fishermen. When Miguel lamented that he was no one anymore after leaving the ship, João smiled. "You're mistaken, Miguel. Your role was just a coat you wore for a season. When the season changes, the coat is put away, but the person inside remains the same. You don't stop being Miguel just because you no longer set sail." Those words were like a drop of water falling onto a still pond. Miguel realized that all these years, he had identified himself entirely with his title and his work. But a role, no matter how important, is only a temporary outer layer. The essence, his patience, his courage, his love for the sea, and his ability to guide others, remained untouched within him. From then on, he began to live out those values in a new form. Miguel started teaching navigation classes for local youth, sharing his knowledge of reading winds, interpreting waves, and maintaining composure in the face of storms. No longer a captain on a ship's deck, he became a guide for a new generation on their own journeys. One day, while standing on the bow of a training boat with his students, Miguel suddenly realized he was still out at sea, still breathing in the salty wind, still feeling the same excitement in helping others find their way. The only difference was that now, he no longer needed a title or position to know who he was. Roles may shift with time, like the ebb and flow of the tide, but the essence, the core qualities, remain steadfast, outlasting every change. And with that understanding, Miguel no longer feared the moments when life asked him to change coats. He knew that in any role, that essence would continue to guide him, like an unwavering lighthouse in the night. 6.4. You don't need to wait for a crisis to wake up. In a quiet corner of Amsterdam, there's a small cafe by the canal. Its owner, Eva, a Dutch woman in her 40s, lives simply, loves tulips, and always greets her customers with a smile. To anyone looking in from the outside, Eva's life seems serene, a job she loves, a cozy home, and close friends. Yet, one winter afternoon, while rearranging the bookshelf, Eva stumbled upon her own journal from 10 years ago. Each line recounted days filled with anxiety, fear, and the feeling of being trapped in an office job she never loved. She remembered that back then. Why do people so often wait for a major event, a shock, a loss, a crisis, before they dare to re-examine their lives? Why do we wait until we're forced to change before we start listening to our inner voice? The next day, while chatting with a regular customer, Lucas, a professor of Eastern philosophy, Eva shared her thoughts. Lucas smiled and said, "Because most of us fall asleep in the rhythm of our routines. As long as things feel okay, we don't realize we're living mechanically. Only when a crisis breaks the shell of comfort are we forced to wake up." But Eva, awakening doesn't have to wait for a crisis. It can begin in an ordinary moment, if you choose to pause and observe yourself. Those words planted a seed in Eva's mind. That evening, what truly matters to me today? She discovered she didn't have to wait for something dramatic to happen to change. Every day was an opportunity to choose a different way of living, a more awake and conscious one. Sometimes Eva shares this story with her customers, especially those hesitating before a big decision. She tells them, life is like the canal outside. You can wait for a big storm to change the flow, or you can start adjusting your oars right now. Don't wait for the water to rise before you learn to swim. And so, this small yet profound message quietly spread. A few customers began making changes in their own lives, not because they were forced to, but because they realized awakening can start in the most ordinary days. Awakening, after all, awakening is not throwing away, but becoming conscious and choosing. Many people, upon hearing about awakening, imagine it as an act of walking away from everything, quitting jobs, leaving relationships, discarding responsibilities. They think that enlightenment means rejecting all roles and structures in life. But that is a misunderstanding. Awakening is not destruction. They step off the stage without confusion. To throw away often comes from aversion or resistance, a reaction to suffering. But to become conscious and choose is an act of freedom. Or set it down when I wish. This shift changes everything. A teacher who has awakened doesn't necessarily quit teaching. A business leader who has awakened doesn't always leave their company to live in the mountains. What changes is their inner stance. They no longer mistake the role for their identity. And so their decisions flow from clarity, not fear or ego. In the modern world, roles are inescapable. We are parents, colleagues, leaders, students, citizens. Knowing it is a role, while my essence remains untouched. This awareness brings lightness. The same job that once felt suffocating can become a space for service and creativity. The same relationship that once felt like a trap can become a conscious dance. The key difference is that you are no longer a prisoner of unconscious patterns. You are the one holding the script. And here lies the paradox. When you awaken, you can play your roles even more skillfully than before because you are no longer lost in them. You have access to the full spectrum of choice, when to act, when to pause, when to walk away, and when to stay. Awakening, then, is not an escape from life, but a deeper entry into it. Not a rejection of form, but a mastery of it. And in that mastery, you discover a freedom that no external change could ever grant. A freedom born from the knowing that while the role may be temporary, the awareness behind it is eternal. 7.2. Being a father without losing yourself. Being a boss without being absorbed by the role. Many people, when stepping into a major role in life, such as becoming a father, a mother, or a leader, unconsciously allow their entire identity to be swallowed by that role. A man, upon becoming a father. Being a father does not mean disappearing as an independent individual. Being a boss does not mean letting authority, responsibility, and professional image consume your soul. Imagine an awakened father. He takes care of his children, protects his family, yet does not let the fear of losing authority or losing respect dictate the way he loves. He listens to his children not only from the authority of an adult, but with the empathy of a friend. He still keeps time for himself, to read, exercise, meditate, nurturing the human being beyond the father role. Similarly, an awakened boss can run a company and make tough decisions without letting the position become a mask glued to their identity. They understand that boss is just a position in the flow of work. Even learn from subordinates, because they do not identify themselves with the image of the one who must always be right. This does not mean taking the role of father or boss lightly. On the contrary, when you are not absorbed by the role, you fulfill it with greater presence. You act not out of fear or ego, but from clarity and inner freedom. You can set boundaries without guilt. Make hard decisions without being haunted by them. Love without binding. The truth is, when you forget your own being, you easily turn the role into a burden. A father may become authoritarian or sacrifice himself to exhaustion, silently resenting his family. A boss may become rigid or controlling, fearing the loss of authority with which they have identified. But when you keep a mindful distance from the role, you both carry out your responsibilities well and maintain inner balance. The key lies in this. You are playing a role, not being played by the role. You remain aware of the boundary between role and self, so that when circumstances change, when your children grow up, when you leave a leadership position, you do not fall into an identity crisis. You still retain your worth, because you never lost yourself in the first place. Then, being a father will not weigh you down, but become an opportunity to learn unconditional love. Being a boss will not make you distant, but an opportunity to lead with wisdom and compassion. Where the streets were alive with the scent of espresso and the hum of late afternoon chatter, lived Dr. Mateo Alvarez. To the world, he was a respected cardiologist, a man whose hands had saved countless lives, whose schedule was booked months in advance, and whose name often appeared in medical journals. On paper, Mateo had it all: professional prestige, financial security, and the admiration of his peers. But behind the calm confidence he projected in hospital corridors, there was an ache, subtle at first, but persistent. It wasn't the exhaustion of long hours or the pressure of high-stakes surgeries. Mateo had grown used to that. This was something deeper, a sense that the life he was living wasn't entirely his own. Sketching the play of sunlight on terracotta rooftops, the folds of his mother's scarf, the soft shadow of an orange tree at dusk. Painting wasn't just a hobby. It was a language through which he understood the world. But when he reached adulthood, the voices of practicality and expectation grew louder. Art is passion. Matteo found himself wandering into a small art supply store, running his fingers over brushes, tubes of paint, and blank canvases. What began as a weekend indulgence became a nightly ritual. He painted in the early mornings before work, in the quiet hours after midnight, sometimes losing track of time entirely. Soon, his apartment walls filled with portraits, landscapes, and abstract explosions of color, each piece an unspoken conversation with his own soul. Friends noticed the change. His colleagues thought it was just a stress relief hobby, but for Matteo, it was something far more profound. Painting wasn't an escape from medicine. It was a return to the part of himself that had been buried under years of should and must. After a year of this quiet dual life, Matteo took a sabbatical. He traveled through the coastal towns of Portugal, sketching fishermen at dawn, markets at midday, and sunsets that bled into the ocean. He began exhibiting his work in small galleries, where strangers connected to his paintings in ways that words could not capture. And no expectation can confine you. Matteo's story whispers a truth many of us overlook. The path back to yourself is rarely a straight line. Sometimes it winds through years of doing what is expected, only to bring you, quietly, unexpectedly, back to the thing you loved before the world told you who to be. And when you arrive, you'll find it wasn't a detour at all, but the journey you were always meant to take. 7.4. Roles are a means, not the goal of life. Throughout life, we each wear many different roles: child, sibling, friend, student, employee, leader, teacher, parent. Each role is like a set of clothes we put on for a specific situation. It helps us fulfill responsibilities, interact appropriately, and contribute to the collective good. But if we forget that these are merely temporary garments, we can easily identify ourselves completely with the role and lose sight of our true nature. There are people who dedicate their entire lives to one profession, one title, to the point that when that position is gone, they fall into a devastating emptiness, or breaking every social rule. It is the freedom of the mind, the state in which you live in alignment with your true self, untouched by the expectations of others or the roles you feel forced to play. Living authentically is not selfishness. It is the courage to never betray who you really are. Their words and actions are consistent, flowing from their inner truth. When you are around them, you feel at ease because their energy is not split between the real self and the outer performance. A clear sign of living authentically is the ability to say no when necessary. This no is not rooted in defiance, but in an awareness of where to draw boundaries to protect one's values and energy. Authentic people understand that every forced yes is a form of abandoning themselves, and the cost of that is often far greater than the discomfort of making someone temporarily unhappy. Living authentically also means daring to acknowledge your imperfections. Rather than hiding weaknesses, they identify them and embrace them as part of their journey. This doesn't make them weaker. On the contrary, it makes them more relatable and genuine in the eyes of others. Vulnerability becomes a bridge that connects, rather than a wall that separates. They know their worth is not defined by the number of likes on social media or by the approval of the masses. This confidence is not arrogance. It is a steady foundation that helps them remain grounded in the face of life's storms. Most importantly, living authentically brings a profound sense of lightness. You don't have to remember how you acted today just to keep up the act tomorrow. You don't exhaust yourself hiding your true feelings. Instead, you can enjoy the present moment without the fear of being exposed. Finally, when you live authentically, you naturally attract the right people. Sincere energy is a natural filter. Those who belong will stay, and those who don't will leave. And you are grateful for that, because relationships built on truth are stronger and healthier than any built on pretense. Living authentically is not a destination, but an ongoing journey. Every day, you are given the choice between staying loyal to yourself or putting on another mask to please the world. And with every choice to remain true, you move closer to the freedom of the mind, where you are not merely existing, but truly living. 8.2. The power of presence, mindfulness, and awakening to every moment. In the pace of modern life, We are often swept away by an endless stream of thoughts, either worrying about the future or regretting the past. The mind rarely rests in the present. Yet it is in the present moment that life truly unfolds. Presence, mindfulness, is not merely a meditation technique. It is a way of living, a state of mind that allows us to see clearly, feel deeply, and live fully in each passing second. The power of presence lies in its ability to free us from the cycle of unconscious living. When we are mindful, we begin to notice things we once overlooked. A falling leaf, a child's laughter, the morning light streaming through the window, all become vivid and precious. We no longer search for special moments to feel joy, because we realize that every moment can be special if we are truly there to experience it. Mindfulness is also a potent remedy for stress. When the mind is anchored in the present, we temporarily disconnect from the repetitive cycles of negative thinking. We find ourselves calmer, less reactive, and more capable of making wise decisions. This practice allows us to stop being carried away by the current of emotions and instead become the observer, the one steering the boat of the mind. Another profound gift of presence is the ability to connect genuinely with others. When we converse with someone while our mind is fully present, we listen with the heart, not just the ears. Practicing mindfulness does not mean we must meditate for hours every day. It could simply mean focusing on our breath while waiting for a bus, savoring the sweetness of a sip of tea. We will understand that all lasting happiness begins with the ability to live fully in each and every moment. 8.3. The story of a woman who once lived for social media and now chooses silent wholeness. In a bustling city like Los Angeles, where life seems to be measured by the number of likes, followers, and views, there was a young woman named Claire Peterson. At 27, she was at the peak of her influencer career. Her Instagram page was a kaleidoscope of perfect coffee cups, exotic travel photos, and artfully staged moments of everyday life. Every photo was meticulously edited, every caption calculated to generate engagement. From the outside, Claire was living the dream: brand sponsorships, invites to glamorous events, and hundreds of thousands of followers hanging on to her every post. But inside, she felt strangely hollow. Every moment of her life seemed to exist for the camera, not for herself. She couldn't remember the last time she watched a sunset without thinking about the best angle to capture it. Even laughter with friends often had to be paused for a retake if it wasn't perfect enough. The turning point came unexpectedly. During a solo trip to Kyoto, Japan, Claire visited a small Zen temple outside the tourist trails. There, she met an elderly monk named Ryashin. He noticed how Claire kept checking her phone, even in the serene garden. With a gentle smile, he asked, "Who are you when no one is watching?" The question struck Claire like lightning. That night, she sat in the temple's simple tatami room, staring at the flickering candlelight. She realized she didn't know the answer. For years, her identity had been built on public approval. The number of likes determined her mood. The algorithm determined her sense of worth. She was trapped in a cycle of constant performance, unable to rest. When she returned to Los Angeles, she made a decision that shocked everyone. She deleted all her social media accounts. No farewell post, no dramatic announcement, just silence. At first, the withdrawal was intense. She felt anxious without the validation she was used to. She feared becoming invisible in a world where visibility was everything. But over time, something unexpected happened. She began to feel lighter. She started taking long morning walks without her phone, cooking meals just for herself without photographing them, and reconnecting with friends in conversations that had no audience. She discovered the quiet pleasure of reading a book from start to finish, the comfort of tending to a small garden, and the deep satisfaction of being present in her own life. 1 year later, Claire described her transformation in a private journal. "I used to live to be seen. Now, I live to see." She no longer felt the need to prove anything or curate her life for approval. The silence she once feared became a source of peace. In stepping away from the noise, she had found the space to listen, to herself, to the people around her, and to the soft rhythms of life that no camera could capture. Claire's story is a reminder that the fullness of life often lies in what we do when no one else is watching. Social media is not inherently harmful. But when it becomes the lens through which we experience reality, we risk losing touch with the essence of living. True connection begins not in the broadcast, but in the presence, not in the applause, but in the quiet knowing that you are already enough. And sometimes, the most revolutionary thing we can do in a world obsessed with visibility is to choose the courage of quiet and let life be lived, not performed. 8.4. Freedom does not come from the outside, but from within. In a fast-moving modern world, where people constantly strive to break boundaries, expand horizons, and chase the dream of absolute freedom in the outer world, there was a man named Samuel Whitaker who found a completely different path. Samuel had once been an adventurous journalist. He began to ask himself, if freedom means being able to go anywhere I want, why do I still feel imprisoned? Samuel lived on a completely different schedule, waking at dawn, sipping hot tea in silence, walking along mist-covered mountain paths, and meditating to the sound of wind rustling through pine trees. No phone, no emails, no noise from the outside world. At first, he felt restless, as though something essential had been taken from him. But gradually, a lightness began to spread within. He realized that freedom was not about being able to go anywhere, but about not needing to go anywhere to feel at peace. It was the freedom of a mind unbound by the fear of missing out, or the compulsion to prove something to others. When he left Bhutan, Samuel no longer carried a list of new destinations, but a new way of seeing life. He still traveled, but no longer to escape. He could stay in one place for months, simply reading books, talking with locals, or quietly watching the rain fall. Samuel's story shows that we can break every outer barrier. Yet if we still carry the invisible chains of comparison, expectation, fear, and ambition within, we are not truly free. On the other hand, when the mind is at peace, even in a small room we can feel space as vast as the sky. True freedom does not lie in how many doors the world opens, but in the ability to stand still and smile even when we step through none of them. And sometimes, the journey to freedom does not begin with a plane ticket, but with the very moment we pause and return to ourselves. Part 9. Conclusion. Roles can change, but the essence remains unchanged. 9.1. Recap of the journey, from unconsciousness to awakening. Looking back on the long journey we have walked together, we can see a clear and unbroken thread, the transformation from living mechanically, carried along by roles and expectations, to living consciously, grounded in awareness of our true self. In the beginning, many of us existed in a haze, without even realizing it. We played the roles given to us by family, society, culture. We became parents, employees, leaders, friends, children, each role with its own script, as if life were a play we entered without rehearsal. And yet, we performed those scripts with such conviction that we mistook them for reality. It was in those early stages that we learned how roles can become cages. A parent might lose themselves in the identity of mother or father until they forget they are also an individual. A leader might become so absorbed in being the boss that they merge entirely with that image, losing touch with the simple humanity beneath it. The more we identified with these roles, the more invisible our true essence became. From there, awareness began to emerge, not all at once, but like the first light before dawn. Who would I be? That was the turning point. Through reflection, mindfulness, and the courage to be present in each moment, we began to reclaim the space between role and self. We realized that we could be a loving parent without erasing our individuality, an effective leader without being consumed by authority, a successful professional without sacrificing our inner peace. We practiced mindfulness, not as an abstract idea, but as a daily, lived experience. The breath became an anchor, helping us return to the present. Small actions, listening without distraction, eating with awareness, walking without rushing, became gateways to a deeper presence. This was the slow. We discover the freedom to live, not as a character in a pre-written script, but as the author of our own unfolding story. 9.2. Opening the door. Rewrite the script of your life with your own hands. There comes a moment in everyone's life when the noise outside becomes deafening, and yet, in the midst of it all, a faint inner voice whispers, "This isn't truly you." That is the turning point, the place where awareness is born. Up until now, you may have been following a script you didn't write, one shaped by the expectations of family, the influence of society, or the invisible rules of the culture you were born into. You might have played roles so convincingly: successful professional, devoted parent, the always strong friend, that even you believe them. But deep down, your authentic self has been waiting patiently, sometimes for decades, for the day you finally listen. The truth is, you don't have to keep reading the same lines. You can take the pen back. You can edit, rewrite, even tear out entire chapters that no longer serve you. This isn't about recklessly abandoning your responsibilities or walking away from everyone in your life. It's about reclaiming authorship, about choosing with intention what you want to carry forward and what you're finally ready to lay down. Look at the life you are living right now. Is it built on genuine choice, or on fear of rejection, on curiosity and passion, or on the desperate need to prove your worth? Sometimes the only way to know is to stop running for a while, to allow yourself the rare gift of stillness. Like a snow globe that's been shaken for too long, your mind needs time to let the flakes settle before you can see clearly again. Living authentically doesn't mean you will always feel safe, understood, or celebrated. In fact, it may unsettle those who've grown accustomed to the version of you that serves their comfort. But the freedom you gain, the deep, it's about dissolving the ones you've locked around your own heart. Perhaps the most empowering truth of all is this: the moment you decide to live authentically, the past loses its grip on you. You are no longer the sum of old mistakes, nor a prisoner of yesterday's labels. In the same way a skilled actor can step out of costume and become themselves again, you can put down the roles you've been cast in. The stage is still yours, but now the performance belongs to you. So here is the invitation. Stop, breathe, feel the weight of the pen in your hand. Look at the pages ahead of you, not as fixed destiny, but as open space. And ask yourself, if no one were watching, if no one had an opinion, what story would I choose to write from here? Then start. It doesn't matter if your first sentences are shaky or if the ink blots on the page. What matters is that they are yours. Because when you live in alignment with your own truth, you discover that authenticity is not a destination, but a daily practice. And from that place, your life ceases to be a script you perform and becomes a story worth living. Part 5. Silent Deaths, when we lose connection with ourselves. 5.1. Symptoms: depression, lack of motivation, and the feeling of living someone else's life. There are deaths that don't take the form of accidents, illnesses, or old age. They are silent deaths, when a person is still breathing, still going to work, still smiling at the right moments, but something inside has long since faded. A death that no one notices, not even the person living it. It doesn't come suddenly, nor with violence, but slowly seeps in like a wound of the spirit that never heals. The symptoms often begin subtly: a vague sense of exhaustion, waking up each morning with a tightness in the chest. Even though physically, everything seems fine. Work continues, relationships are intact, life holds no major crisis. Yet a part of us is no longer present.